This reading is from Luke 19, 1 through 10. He entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and he was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was so short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry up and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much. Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost."
Amen. Thank you, Tony. May God bless the reading of the Word. I remember when I was a little kid going to Faith Baptist Church in Maryville, Tennessee. I don't know how old I was. I was probably 10, 11, 12 years old. I rode the church bus because there were a couple of little girls that rode the church bus, and their father threw knives at people who came to his house. He was an angry alcoholic man, and so I never went over there to see those girls, but I could see them on the church bus, and so I rode the church bus. And I sat in the back like good little Baptist boys in training. And I remember a young man sitting in front of me, and he was probably 3 or 4 years younger than me, maybe 7 or 8 years old, and we sang out of the Baptist hymnal. And one day I overheard him singing one of the most familiar Baptist songs that we could sing, and he was singing at the top of his lungs, but he had the word just a little wrong. We were singing, "Jesus saves, Jesus saves." Y'all remember that? What's the verse? Y'all, all the Baptists are nodding. I get it. These poor little kids back there hollering at the top of his lungs when he gets to the chorus, "Jesus shaves, Jesus shaves." And I'm like, he didn't see the picture. He didn't shave. There's a sign. What's the name of that church, Don Martin? It's out there between here and Anson. And say again? Pleasant Grove Baptist Church. It's been in Texas Monthly because they've got a neon sign like you're used to seeing in a nightclub in the front window that says "Jesus saves," and it announces it to everybody driving up and down 277, right? I wanted to pick on you today. I picked on Don last week and made it sound like he's a bad guy. I wanted you to know that he's driven past a church every week of his life for a very long time now. He's not a bad guy, so he knew exactly where that church was, and I've seen that in Texas Monthly. You have too. When I was growing up, that's how we talked about our faith journey. Are you saved or are you not saved? You know, I was evangelical. I don't know, some of you may have been a little more liturgical, and the language could have been different. But for me, growing up in East Tennessee, this is how we talked about our relationship to the church and our relationship to God. Are you saved or are you not saved? You're saved or you're not saved, which really kind of came down to, are you in or are you out? Are you in the church and part of the church, or are you out of the church? Are you in the group that's going to heaven, or are you out of that group and in the group that's going somewhere else? And so, but always, are you saved or not saved? I didn't have other language then. I remember the greatest example of salvation, and the one that we all followed at some level, was Billy Graham. He was the greatest evangelist of the 20th century. And he sort of set the prototype, the model for how we would do this in little small churches everywhere with these great big crusades. And we would talk about those crusades in terms of how many salvations, with an S on the end. Are you with me? How many salvations were there? And you would see hundreds, if not thousands of people at the end of a Billy Graham rally at the Cotton Bowl or some great big stadium, and they're down in the front and they're praying to be saved. What a powerful preacher, what a powerful image. We all tried to emulate that in our lives, in our churches, in our neighborhoods. I remember the day that my granddaddy was baptized. Okay? I didn't know a lot about his faith life. He didn't talk to me about that. I've told you a few granddaddy stories. He talked to me about a lot of things. He did a lot of things for me, and then the thing he would always say is, what are you going to do when I'm not here? And I'd say, I don't know. I can't think about that. But Granddaddy, I've told y'all briefly, and I'll repeat it now. I was baptized twice as a youth. I was probably 7 years old the first time. I was a teenager involved in the youth group at my church. The second time, in that baptism I wanted to do because I felt like I was involved now. I felt like I was doing something, and I wanted to do baptism again. And so, and I look back now with my disciple understanding, and I think, well, that wasn't necessary. But let me tell you something very, very good and very precious that came out of that second baptism. I was baptized at Rockford Baptist Church, Rockford, Tennessee, and my grandfather came to that ceremony. And he never went to church. But he came to that ceremony. He loved me very, very much. And it must have moved him. Because his two daughters, who were members of First Cumberland Presbyterian Church, had been inviting him to church for years and years. Two daughters, two sets of grandchildren, two families firmly in this church. And they couldn't get him to come. But after that baptism, something moved in him. And he went to the church. And then we started going with him. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I had motives, just like the little girls on the church bus at the Baptist church. My grandmother had a rule that if you wanted to eat Sunday dinner, you went to church. And so once they got started to church, I had a shoe in for Sunday dinner. All I had to do was go to church at First Cumberland Presbyterian Church with my grandparents. And I was in for the best Sunday lunch in town. And I did that week after week, and I was there the week that my grandfather was baptized. Oh, there are some people who might say, even today, that he wasn't baptized and that it didn't take and that he didn't go to heaven even. Because what they did in the Presbyterian church was they brought him up to the front and they poured water over his head. He's a retired man. This man is pushing 70 years old, and they are baptizing him in front of the church and pouring water over him. I did not understand what I was watching, but I know this. I saw, it was more than pouring water. I saw his daughters, I saw his son-in-laws, I saw the family gathered around, and I knew that that day salvation had come to my grandfather's house. Wow, it was beautiful. It was a great, great picture. I worked a retreat with a comedian once. I want to say his name was Mike Williams. I want to say it's Mike Warnke, but if you know who Mike Warnke is, he's a famous Christian comedian, and it wasn't Mike Warnke. It was another Mike, I think Williams. He was a writer. He had written for what's the guy that read Carrot Top, and for Jay Leno. And he was a Christian, and we were doing a marriage retreat together, and we were all together there, and he was telling lots of funny stories. That was his gift. And he said that at one point some of his friends recognized that there'd been a change in his life. And they said to him, Mike, I didn't know you were saved. When did you get saved? And his comment was, well, I think it was about 2,000 years ago, but I just found out about it about 15 months ago. So that leads us to a question today then. What does it mean to be saved? And exactly what is it that we are saved from? And so today I want to talk to you about what progressive Christianity says about salvation. And we'll review what we have heard and know about salvation through our own spiritual journeys and our own experience in church. Is it pie in the sky when you die? That's the question Tony Campolo asks. Is salvation all pie in the sky when you die? In other words, we depend upon Jesus, I think. Don't let me speak for you, but you may agree with this, and if you do, you can say amen. But we depend upon Jesus and our faith in Him, for at the point of our death, we will be accepted by God. We get to go to heaven because we have been saved. We have known Jesus. We've made that confession of faith. And so I don't think that there's a challenge to the idea that what happens to us after death is firmly in the hands of God, that we are out of control of that, and that our faith lies in God and in God in Christ. But is it all pie in the sky when you die? Is it just fire insurance? Is it a way of satisfying God's wrath and anger toward us so that we might avoid hell? I don't know about you, but part of my motivation to be saved as a young man was that they preached the fear of hell into me, and I didn't want to go to hell. I didn't know it, but I was getting really afraid of God at the same time. And I had to kind of get over one with hopefully without getting over the other, or maybe, I don't know. But is salvation more than just fire insurance? Is it a way to say, well, I got out of going to hell? And remember the Seinfeld episode with Putty, the guy that dated Elaine? And he became an evangelist. And she was like, oh, I guess you're going to preach to me now. And he's like, no, I don't know. You're the one going to hell, not me. Why should I care? Is salvation universal? That's a huge question. That's a question that I get to struggle with a lot because some people say I'm a universalist. I'm going to tell you again, I'm not a universalist or a progressive by definition because I've read the doctrine of universal Christianity and I'm not much into doctrine. I'm a Barton Stoneite and an Alexander Campbellite. And while I don't disagree with everything in the doctrine, there are things about it that I can't sign off to. So that makes me not a universalist. I'm not a progressive. I told you there are things that progressives embrace that I'm not against, but I'm not necessarily in there either. But there are questions about universal salvation. Is it for just the in group? Is it that those who are saved are in and those who are out aren't? If that's true, I'm not saying that it's not. I want to ask you a very difficult question, and I don't have the answer, and I'll leave it with you. You wrestle with this one. 2/3 of the world today are not Christian. Does that mean that 2/3 of the world today, if they don't become Christian before they die, will go to hell when they die? Because there are a lot of Christians who say that's true, and they may be right, and some of those people are on airplanes right now headed to other parts of the world to evangelize. As a matter of fact, the work of evangelism has come to the point now where there are probably more professed Christians in Russia or in Africa than there are in the United States of America. And people are starting to send missionaries back over to the United States now to evangelize, or maybe the term re-evangelize, the United States. Carlton Pearson, he was known as Oral Roberts' black son in the 70s. He was the first black student at Oral Roberts University, Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he was a very charismatic preacher. He was a third-generation preacher from San Diego, California. He established the Church of Higher Dimension in Tulsa, Oklahoma that grew to over 5,000 members. He was a preacher, a great preacher of the Azusa movement, of Pentecostal and Churches and Assemblies of God theology. And he had a revelation one day watching the television that he said he was watching TV. Now, you judge whether it's a valid revelation or not. It's not. This is how his story. He's watching TV. He sees a Somalian kid starving to death, and he said, God, this is not right. You created them and put them in this mess on the earth. You put them right here in this mess on the earth. They're going to suffer through hell through their entire life, and then when they die, they turn around and go right to hell then. And it's not right. And he says he heard God speak to him and say, Carlton, is that what you think we're doing? And he said, well, I've been told that all my life. They're not Christian, and if they don't become Christians, they're going to go to hell when they die, and so they need to be saved. And he said, God spoke to him and said, Carlton, if that's what you think, then you need to put down your food right now and put your little baby down on the floor, kiss her, and get up out of your chair, get on the next thing smoking, and get over there and start saving these people. Now, time's running out. And Carlton's response to God was pretty honest and genuine at this point. He said, no, you don't ask me for that. I've given you 40 of the best years of my life in evangelism and in the church, and you don't tell me that I have to save the world. I can't do that. And that was his revelation. God said, exactly. You don't have to do that. We already did it. You just need to go tell them. They just don't know, you see. Isn't that beautiful? It wasn't beautiful for Carlton because his church of 5,000 dwindled to 300. And in his own words, if you take hell and the devil out of Pentecostal theology, I'm not picking on those folks at all. But he said there's nothing left, and that's from him. He was in the movement. And so is salvation a universal thing or not? At least in Paul's writings in Ephesians and Colossians. In the first chapters of those two letters, he talks about God redeeming all things to God through Christ. Redeeming all things. There is a picture of Pauline theology of a salvation that is universal and that is cosmic. That's the term they use, is the cosmic Christ. Is salvation an individual thing, or is it a group thing? You know, in our culture today, we are so individualistic, and I'm going to just mention it today, but I'm going to talk a lot about it next week. But everything is so much geared around the individual. Is salvation an individual thing, or is it something that happens in groups of people, or in a group, or is God interested in the salvation of this world? Is it all about going somewhere else, or is any of it about this life? And if it's about this life and we're waiting for it there, are we missing something here? Are we participating actively in God's plan for salvation if we are only sitting and waiting? And can we count salvations with S's? How many salvations did we have last year? Usually they want to know, how many people did you baptize? They were all saved. Even when Paul addresses the Philippians and says to work out your own salvation with trembling and fear. And it sounds at first, listen, like he's talking to the individual, because he is. But he's telling individuals in the group, in your larger group, work this out. Because everything he mentions after that, gossip and malice, and stop these things that are damaging the community around you. And so one of the things that progressive Christianity likes to say is that salvation is for the group. It's God redeeming things and people and groups, not just individuals. Look at God's original plan for salvation. That's what I call the 10 Commandments. You go back to the Hebrew people, there's 10 Commandments. The first 4, if you haven't noticed, are about your relationship to God. The last 6 are about your relationship to other people. Remember what Anselm said? I told you last week that Anselm thought that we had offended God's honor. If you break those first 4 commandments, it's possible you might be offending God's honor. You can't have no gods before me, no graven images. But what is it about God's honor that is offended? It seems that that the first 4 commandments point to the last 6 and say, when we damage community and when we damage the salvation of all, then we are offending God's honor. God's a whole lot harder to offend than that. I think it's easier to offend God by hurting one of God's children than it is by saying anything you want to God. Isn't that at least true of you? You can talk about me all you want, but when you talk about my kids, my religion gets challenged, okay? I lose peace, love, and light real quick and have to start praying real hard again. And so Jesus and Paul seem to be very interested in community. One last thing. Danny Dutton, our 8-year-old theologian again. It appears he doesn't say an awful lot about salvation. But he did say this. Jesus is God's son. He used to do all the hard work, like walking on water and doing miracles and trying to teach people about God who really didn't want to learn. And they finally got tired of him preaching to them and they crucified him. We talked about that last week when we talked about the cross. But he was good and kind like his Father. And he told his Father that they didn't know what they were doing and to forgive them. And God said, okay. That's Danny Dutton's view of salvation right there. I'm sure it'll get more complicated as he grows. And there'll be a lot more boundaries and a lot more things that you and I have to remember. But the question today is, are you saved? Is your household saved? Is it something you're enjoying today? Are you participating in the salvation of this life and this earth and this planet and these people and this church? Or is it something we're waiting for? Richard Rohr tells a story. She went right to sleep. Can I hold her? Yeah. She's so cool. It's too hot for that coat. Let's take that off. Why does her shirt say something bad? Okay, come here, big girl. Oh, it's not easy being a princess. Yes. I I told you the story a long time ago about Richard Rohr. He talked about his brother and his wife having their second child. He can't talk about his own children because he's a priest. And might I say that he's a great example of one person who got it right. This is how you do this. Hey, big girl. Oh, no, we don't need that. And so this is her favorite seat. You see? Come on, don't cry. Come on, don't cry. I'll take that. Here you go, big girl. This is really her favorite seat. She sits right here and she sees the world from Grandpa's lap. Richard tells a story about when his brother and sister had their second child, and the older boy kept wanting some time alone with the baby. And they kept saying, "Oh, my goodness, Stephen, I can't. I'm trying to be quiet, you know." Wow. Much love, brother. Much love. And he says that that the older child wanted some time alone with the baby, and, you know, they were cautious about it. But one evening they let him go into the room and peer through the bars of the crib while the baby was falling asleep. And he looked at the baby and he said these words. He said, "Tell me what it's like. I'm beginning to forget." Is that beautiful? I keep telling you, if you go to funerals that I do, that when Jesus told his disciples, "I'm going away because there's a spirit that will come that you can hear after I leave," that's not just true of Jesus, it's true of everyone. And it can take years. My grandfather's been dead since 1977. I don't even know how long that is anymore. It's been a long time. And he had such a powerful impact on my life that when my grandchildren were born, I chose the name Granddaddy because that's what I called him. And I just wanted to keep that alive. And I remember going to his house and breaking into the door and running through the house screaming as soon as I got inside, "Granddaddy, Granddaddy." And I'd run and I would jump up in his lap. He'd be sitting in the chair. And we spent so much time together before he died. And much of it I don't remember. I was too small. When I was born, my mother was a single mom. The guy who had become my father and raised me was in Korea fighting a war. And my grandfather was very angry because his daughter had become pregnant out of wedlock. And my grandmother just did what she knew to do. She just started taking care of this baby. And I don't know what happened, but somewhere, way, way early, like around this size right here, my granddad and me just fell in love with each other. And the other day, I picked this little girl up. I put her on my leg right here because, see, that's her favorite place to sit. She sees the world from right there right now. And something happened. You know, there's a little place in my brain, probably the size of a microchip in your cell phone, where there's this memory that had been imprinted about sitting on that old man's lap and watching the world go by. And I'd forgotten. Been a lot of grief since then. There have been a lot of stories that I have wanted to remember and worked on remembering, but I was too young to remember that. And somehow or another, this little bitty person right here in this little package stroked that little microchip in my brain. And that memory came running back. It flooded back with smells and with sounds and with tears. Or I imagined it. One of the two. But I know my mother struggled during those years, and my grandparents worked out salvation with trembling and with fear. And I'm sure the day I was born, they could have said, "Today salvation has come to this house." And so as we struggle in our community, this is a community where half of the arrests every day in the newspaper are meth-related. Read it for yourself and start talking about it. Start telling the people in your community you're tired of it. Start telling law enforcement you're tired of it. Start telling people that you are afraid might be involved in it you're tired of it. This is a community where the mentally ill are pushed aside and treated as if there is no hope and no salvation for them, or that they've just made a bunch of bad choices. And lots of times there's no help available until they kill themselves or someone else. But as we struggle for peace, and peace is possible, salvation is real, and it can be now. It doesn't have to be all about later. I hope that you have a little person like this that strokes some part of your mind, that wakes up a hope and a peace in you, and maybe even a memory of when a time was simpler and God was great. You know, the time when you really felt saved. Remember that? And when it happens, I hope that God has all the glory and the honor. Will you pray with me right now?